for 515 Fantasy Football.
I know football. Are you ready for some football?
Domination on Sundays begins with listening to these guys on Thursdays.
You ready for this?
Over 40 years of fantasy football experience between them.
Yeah!
One is a proud veteran of the United States Marine Corps, husband and father, entering his 18th year of fantasy competition. Brian Eikenberry. The other, also a proud husband and father, is one of the winningest fantasy minds in the state. Celebrating 24 years of excellence. Andy Hall.
Let's get the game on!
It's showtime. The 515 Fantasy Football Show with your hosts, Andy Hall and Brian Eikenberry.
Meaningful preseason football games have returned. Hallelujah! This is 515 Fantasy Football, heard each and every Thursday on 1350 AM, ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. The show also available weekly via Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and online at espndesmoines.com. Over 40 years of fantasy experience between myself and my good friend and co-host, Brian Eikenberry. Good to see you again, man.
Aloha.
44 years, I think, to be exact, between the two of us.
I can't get past fingers and toes, my friend.
Neither one of us are 44 years old, so
Yeah,
that'll
that's
tell
no
you
kidding.
something. Yeah, for me it was 93. For you it was just a few years later. But Brian's got is a lot of commissioner experience, which I don't have. I've been a player all these years in different formats and leagues and whatnot. But Brian, he's a commish guy.
Yeah, I'm the commish guy. I like it. It's not that I like to be in control. I just like to manage things the way I like to do it, and then I get a little carried away with it, and I make a whole bunch of work. So, like, at the end of my league, I have, like, these in-depth spreadsheet that account for every nickel. You know, I'm a full transparency kind of a guy, so I just like to list everything out. And I like to get creative with the money and how we're going to spread this out and do this, but I'm also ruthless and like, sorry, you mismanage your team, you suck.
You know what I think we should do? We've got 5 shows in the month of August, this being the second of 5. Maybe we should find some time to commit a segment to talking about commissioning. And
oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Don't you think that'd be a worthwhile segment? Because, I mean, there is a percentage of our audience that are commissioners of their league.
Yeah, and you know what? There are a lot of rules that I implement. I'm kind of the hard-ass commissioner.
That's all right.
In a way.
It's a good thing.
Because I've had friends who join the league, and then they go, dang, I like how you run this.
With an iron fist rather than a limp one.
It's an iron fist with a little bit of glitter on it. You know, that's how I do it. Firm but fair, man.
This is what I like about being in that one league of yours that you've commissioned for a while, and you graciously invited me to be a part of it last year for the first time.
You're easy money.
Yeah, easy money. How about the guy that gave up David freaking Johnson so I could draft him in the first round
sweet.
last year?
He kept Julio. Whoops.
That was not smart.
No.
No matter how you found us, the fact that you're here means the world to us. Invite you to connect with us on Facebook, 515 Fantasy Football, on Twitter at 515 Fantasy. I'm on Twitter at Andy Hall Radio. Brian's at IkeFFB. That's IKEFFB. We also have our own channel on the SleeperBot app in case you haven't yet downloaded that. Big, huge, massive, girthy mock happening tonight with some of us analysts and podcast hosts on the app. Look forward to reporting back to you on that next week as we look forward to participating in the Sleeper Wire Pro-Am this season.
Whoop, whoop.
If there's one thing about this gig that Brian and I love the most, though, it's probably the interaction with you, I'd say. Our mission, as it's been since day one, is to dignify you with a response 100% of the time. We will never ignore you. And this all stems from me, before we started doing this show, reaching out to my favorite analysts and quote-unquote experts and never hearing from them, ever. And I actually saw someone on Twitter ask the quote-unquote community what percentage of tweets they actually respond to. And I was, no surprise, really disappointed in the results of that poll. And people were being honest here, and some of them were like 0 to 20%. I'm like, what are you doing with your time?
Yeah, you either got to be a hot chick or verified to get a response a lot of times out of a lot of people, and I am neither of those.
Fantasy football has got to be better about serving our people. And Brian and I mean, we've made it our most important rule of thumb, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree. That's the fun part, interaction, debate, conversation, because there isn't quite an exact science to this. It also has gut feeling, attitude, and personal burns factored in.
Over the course of this show, we'll talk draft strategy. We'll break down the best and worst offensive lines in the game. Pop quiz, of course. Flea flicker later on. We'll unveil our first round of super sleepers that we believe will help you win your league. A conversation about handcuffs we care about as well. Going to talk about ways you can freshen up your league and welcome a very special guest onto this show shortly. But first, we begin, as we always do, with a few headlines of fantasy note. ESPN's Chris Carter, he's injected himself into the Ezekiel Elliott situation. He believes a suspension is looming. Chris Carter, of all people, Brian.
Did I not call a 6-game suspension last week?
Here's what I think might end up happening. If there is a lengthy suspension, is there not an appeals process that can get kind of tied up in the courts, so to speak, and maybe drag on through the season and into the offseason?
Not for domestic violence.
So that's absolutely the case.
Correct.
Okay.
In the NFL, domestic violence is one of the few that do not get an appeal process, which was bargained in the CBA because the NFL has a hard stance on domestic abuse. So that's an automatic 6 games, non-negotiable.
How far down your draft board do you move Ezekiel Elliott? Most of us have
nowhere.
Most of us have him at number 3 running back right now, and probably number 3 overall, right? Do you move him down? Do you move a guy like Antonio Brown ahead of him? Maybe depending on the format, maybe in PPR.
Yeah, depending on the format, but here's the reality of the situation.
6 games is a lot.
So you've got 13 games in your regular season, so he's gone for 45% of your season. He'll be coming back fresh, rested, and angry when you're making your, if commissioned and scheduled properly, you're about to start making your second push through your division.
You better hope you draft well then. There's no room for busts in that.
No, it would be one of those things where you need to, week 7, you need to be at least 3-3.
Okay.
You need to be halfway through. You get Zeke back. If you've made it 3 wins, 3 losses in week 7 when he comes back without Zeke, you're going to go probably 5-1 the next 6 games.
I'm telling you right now, if it's 6 games, I'm moving him down my draft board. I am going to move maybe 1 or 2 running backs ahead of him. I'm going to move at least 3 wide receivers ahead of him. So he's down probably around pick 10, I guess, of the first round in a 12-team league.
So I'll give you a perfect example.
Yeah.
Last year I drafted Gronk. I killed both my leagues. Had I had Gronk, I would have been unstoppable. I probably could have pushed for an undefeated season.
Never know.
So I'm just saying, it's possible to survive without your number 1 pick, especially if he's coming back in week 7. Your goal should be to go 3-3.
Dolphins wide receiver Jarvis Landry now dealing with a somewhat similar predicament that might result in no contract extension through this season. Speaking of the Dolphins, free agent quarterback Jay Cutler signed a deal with Miami after it was presumed that Ryan Tannehill would need to undergo surgery to repair a partially torn ligament in the same knee that ended his season in 2016. Jay Cutler is your starting quarterback.
I was more excited for the Tebow conversation that was on the back end of that.
Apparently, he was in the conversation.
Which is
that.
Awesome.
I know,
That's
right?
why I was like, oh, this would be sweet.
Bills signed free agent wide receiver Anquan Bolden, who I've read some reports here just yesterday, actually, was this one. He's been lining up in the slot initially at camp. So Zay Jones, Sammy Watkins on the outside, Bolden right where he's comfortable, and right where he was a major red zone threat for Detroit last year.
Yeah, look, the guy, he's not going to run down 40 yards downfield, but he's got that 10-yard route and hands of steel to catch you them touchdowns.
Tell me, what do you think of that Patriots backfield? They've got James White and Deion Lewis currently listed atop the depth chart, Rex Burkhead behind them, and then presumed starter Mike Gillislee. Is this just more? My theory has always been Bill Belichick hates fantasy football with a passion, so he's doing this to mess with us. Is that right?
Yeah, he could care less.
Right, I get
and
that too.
he does exactly what he wants to do. And he literally trolls media every single day, 10 times a day. Behind closed doors, he laughs at that stuff constantly.
Colts GM Chris Ballard says Andrew Luck is not a lock for week 1. He's got that shoulder ailment. The good news here is that I read a report that it appears he's not going to be put on the PUP.
PUP?
Yeah, which means that he's not going to be out for an inordinate amount of time. It looks like if he is going to be held out, it'll just be for week 1 maybe. We'll see. Devontae Freeman signed a big deal. He's now the highest paid running back under an extended contract with the Atlanta Falcons, and he's getting paid. So what does that do to Tevin Coleman? Tevin's crying in the corner right now.
Yeah, he's crying in the corner, but it makes Le'Veon Bell lick his chops even bigger.
And a 3-headed backfield, at least to start this season in Jacksonville. This is according to several reports. Rookie running back Leonard Fournette is the presumed starter, but TJ Yeldon's there. Chris Ivory's there. What happens in Jacksonville remains to be seen. I guess they could totally screw it up, and that's, I guess, Jacksonville's way. Got a lot to cover over the course of this show. Really excited next to bring on a very special guest to talk about ways to freshen up your fantasy league. Scott Fish, yes, of Scott Fish Bowl fame, is next on the 515 Fantasy Football Show. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show, heard each and every Thursday on 1350 AM ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. You can also get the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and online at espndesmoines.com. Andy Hall diving into a subject that I'm 100% sure my guest this segment will agree with, and that's the fact that, fantasy football leagues are meant to be, above all, fun. So it's okay to freshen things up once in a while and do something different. I'm proud to be joined by the mastermind behind the biggest fantasy league in the history of the game, the Scott Fish Bowl, Mr. Scott Fish. It's great to have you on. Thanks for your time, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, I 100% agree. Fantasy's meant to be fun. You got to do what you can to make it fun.
Well, over 1,400 people by your count at the website are competing in SFB 7 this year, a mix of fantasy experts and fans, and you're doing it for a great cause. Now, before we explore your unique scoring system, Scott, wanted to give you an opportunity to explain the charity angle and why it's so important that you'd take on such a massive endeavor.
Yeah, so the actual main event is 720 teams, and then we have probably over 1,000 now playing in satellites. It's meant to, what the satellites do is they run through fantasycares.net, which is a charity I run, a drive that buys toys for kids every Christmas. And last year we raised $6,000. This year we've raised over $15,000 to just toys for kids. It's going to be amazing.
That's awesome. 15 grand?
Yeah, 15 grand. It's going to take hours to pick out all those toys.
Hey, that's okay. Great problem to have, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Real quick, before we get into the nuts and bolts of what makes the Scott Fish Bowl so unique and fun, how can someone that's interested in competing in SFB 8 get themselves in the running?
Well, probably the easiest way is to sign up for a satellite league, which is a best ball league at fantasycares.net. The second easiest way is probably just to sign up on scottfishbowl.com. I mean, we had 5,400 people sign up to play in this thing this last year. I expect it to be even more next year.
I think it's probably safe to say that you're a guy that subscribes to the theory that taking fantasy enthusiasts out of their comfort zone and making them approach the game in a different way creates a serious element of fun and can re-energize an otherwise mundane, same old rut that many leagues find themselves in after a few years. Is that about right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially when you're kind of a degenerate like I am or like a lot of people are, you can put yourself on autopilot in your normal PPR league or your normal standard league. You got to mix it up. When you introduce a bunch of new strategies, it kind of invigorates you to want to figure it out.
So give me a couple of examples of what you've done in SFB 7 this year that might have thrown everybody off their drafting game.
Well, SFB 7 was the first time I had gone with a scoring that wasn't balanced. In last year's Scott Fish Bowl, I created a scoring system that was so balanced that at any pick, you had no idea who people were going to pick, like a quarterback here or a tight end, because I made the positions balance out. This year, I went a little different. I went with basically a standard league, and then I threw in points per first down. I took away PPR, which people love, and I made them focus on points per first down, something that most people are not versed in. And that caused a lot of chaos because people just didn't know how to draft for it.
And this is kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about in not only throwing everybody off their game comfort-wise, but also sort of an opportunity to re-energize your love of fantasy football and how you approach drafting a team. This is sort of a metric that we're not seeing a whole lot of right now, is this point per first down type of thing. And I imagine that you're probably, spending a good amount of time dreaming up some new metrics as you move forward with Scott Fishbowl 8 next year.
Oh, yeah. I'm probably going to move back to more of a balanced setup. But it was good to get first downs out there and get people to, consider them, because it is something that's really, really important in the game. It's a lot more important than a reception. A 0-yard reception it's basically worthless in the NFL. But first downs matter. So next year I'm probably going to have some kind of a combination, because people do like PPR. I'm going to go back to something a little more balanced.
It's interesting. I threw the question out a while back to my listeners. There's no real industry standard for, what fantasy football should be scoring wise. Should it be PPR? Should it be half PPR? Should it be standard leagues? I mean, everybody likes to do things in a different manner, and it all kind of comes down to your commissioner when it comes down to it. But do you think there should be like an industry standard?
Probably not. I think that whatever you enjoy playing is good enough, and I think that there should be outlets on fantasy sites for people to read up on different formats or learn about different formats, but I don't know that there should be a standard.
For those unaware, Scott has somewhat recently become a member of the newly relaunched Fanball team. Being a Twin Cities native myself, Scott, I know what a big deal it is that some of the players behind the original Fanball have resurrected this brand. Pretty exciting.
Oh, it's very exciting. If you would have told me, I'm a Minnesota native myself, obviously, and if you would have told me 15, 20 years ago that I'd be sitting 5 feet from Paul Charchian, it would have been a little bit of a geek out moment. But here I am. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, you mentioned Paul Charchian, FSTA Hall of Famer, and one of the godfathers of this thing we love so much, fantasy football. And he came up with a really cool idea for leagues looking to up the ante a bit and, again, do something different. And that's the idea of the Empire League. Can you give our listeners a synopsis of what makes the Empire League an idea worth exploring?
Yeah. There's a lot of dynasty leagues out there that get stale over time because teams are resistant to change rules. And once you get used to rules and people stop being quite as active, what Paul's Empire Leagues do is that after someone wins the league 2 years in a row, it's disbanded. The league is done, and you start back over from scratch if you want, or it's just done. And basically what he does is you take half the pot, half the entry fees every year, and put it into a pot. And the person who wins twice in a row gets that full pot. So there's this giant amount of money at stake for the first double champion, which is pretty nice. And a lot of incentive for people to not sit on the fence after they maybe consider themselves out of the running. Right. Exactly. You got to keep churning in those leagues, because it could be you, and you don't want someone else to pull off that double win before you can. Yeah, I can imagine, and I know this concept's only been around for maybe a couple of years, but I mean, some of these leagues, it's not an easy thing to win 2 fantasy championships in a row, Scott. And I mean, some of those pots must be absolutely massive. Oh yeah, at Safe Leagues, we got a couple of them that are in their 3rd year, and it's already up to $3,000. I can imagine if there are leagues out there that people are doing on their own with bigger entry fees, I can see those pots being giant. So how does one start an Empire League? You have your group of guys. Is it like do you do a snake draft to start, or how does it begin? Really, you can do it any way you want. I mean, we've had auction and snake draft Empire Leagues. The only requirement is you put half the money every year into the Empire pot, and when someone wins twice, it's done. So you can do this with any league.
That's very, very cool. It's something that I'm considering for one of my leagues, one of my home leagues that I've been in for quite some time. And again, it's a case of, guys that have been doing it for so long. It's almost, I think you used the term autopilot earlier, and I think that's exactly how it feels sometimes. So maybe an opportunity to reinvigorate. I mean, nothing motivates a fantasy enthusiast like money.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when the pots get that big. I mean, it's hard to go on autopilot when you got those kind of dollars flashing in your face.
Back to Fanball, I noticed that you guys launched a podcast over the summer. Is there any plan to keep that going? Yes, there is. We moved offices. We built a brand new office and a brand new studio. I'm actually standing in it right now. We got a little bit more work to do, but I believe we're going to record 2 podcasts tomorrow. So, you should have more Fanball podcasts by the end of the week. I imagine you've been hearing from a number of people that are fans of yours. That's not the only podcast you're involved in, though, right?
No, I do several podcasts. I have the Bull Rush podcast, and then I have a Commission Impossible podcast. I do both of those with Ryan McDowell and Dynasty Frank. Those are really good shows, really, really enjoyable shows.
Great people to follow on Twitter as well. Before we let you go, Scott, you've been competing in fantasy football since 1992. Now, that's exactly one season before I got my first taste in a family league. That was 93. I'm curious as to whether or not you remember who your first ever draft pick was.
I absolutely do. Because it was touchdown only, my first pick was Steve Young. And the entire first round was quarterbacks. So in the second round, I was able to get Emmitt Smith.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a good first year.
That's a really good first. Did you end up winning that league? Do you remember or no?
I did. I did win the first 2 years of that league.
It was like you were meant to do this or something.
Yep, it was a good start to the career.
No question about it. Wow. I think Thurman Thomas would have been my first round pick back in 93. And now, granted, it wasn't a dynasty league. I don't think a lot of people were doing dynasties in 92, 93.
Right. Mine was a dynasty league, but only because we didn't know any better. Our dad did a Big Ten basketball fantasy league, and they kept the players throughout their college career. So when we started the football one, that's just how we thought it was done. You just kept everybody. So ours was technically a dynasty league to start, but I don't think that was common.
Well, now, see, that makes you one of the original pioneers, does it not?
I don't know. I've talked to people that I've tracked some dynasty leagues back to the late 70s at this point, and that's got me beat by well over a decade.
What you want to avoid, though, is becoming Paul Charchian when he came up with the do the opposite strategy about a decade ago, and now all these people are thinking this quote-unquote zero running back strategy is a new thing.
Yeah, I know. That is interesting to look at, and they... Sometimes you see them talk about how it's a different reasoning behind it. Well, if you look at the draft board, it's the same exact thing. Whether the reasoning was different or the same, the end result is the same.
Scott Fish is online at scottfishbowl.com, on Twitter at scottfish24. Really appreciate you taking the time for your neighbors to the south, Scott. We're longtime fans of yours, and as I mentioned earlier, the Fanball crew in general. So this has been a thrill.
Oh, thanks for having me on. This is great. We're excited to hear about the relaunch.
Same here, my friend. Fanball was actually the very first fantasy magazine I ever bought, probably 1994, 95, somewhere in there. And what made it super cool for me was the fact that the brains behind all that great content were local. Paul Charchian and his gang of fantasy phenoms were actually in my hometown of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And to this day, I put Paul and John Tuvey, Matt Harrison, Brian Johnson, Christian Peterson, that whole crew, right up there with the absolute best in the business. Plenty still to come on this edition of the 515 Fantasy Football Show, including a conversation between Brian and I about the most important handcuffs to own this season. We'll also talk sleepers, offensive lines, the ever-popular pop quiz as well, and next, auction or snake draft, dynasty or redraft. We'll talk it out shortly. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM ESPN Radio. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show, heard each and every Thursday on 1350 AM ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. We're also on Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes. We're on Stitcher. Is that Google Play, by the way?
Yeah, everyone's changing their names, and that's like the number one rule not to do. But if you're those two companies, you can change whatever you want.
If you've been branded for so long, though, not in so much in Stitcher world, but I'd say for iTunes, like I get why they want to make it Apple Podcasts, but that's a whole rebranding campaign, man.
Yeah, everyone's still going to call it iTunes regardless.
Anyway, lots of ways you can find our show, including ESPNDesMoines.com. That's our online home where you can find my updated PPR rankings by position. I write columns throughout the course of the year, and we'll be highlighting those from time to time. Want to thank Scott Fish from Fanball and Scott Fishbowl fame again for his time and helping us with the second segment, talking about ways to freshen up your fantasy league. Another way to do it, Brian, let's say you've been in a league for a long time. All you've ever done is the snake draft. You've never tried auction. Are you a fan of the auction league?
If commissioned properly with the right amount of stuff, yeah. Like I like the variations because it changes up your thought process, so you don't get stuck, and everything's a little bit different. Your fundamentals are the same, but the way you go about your business is a little bit different.
You're dealing with dollar amounts, first of all, and dollar amounts attached to specific players. So that's a certain way that you can project a player is by a dollar amount, essentially, and how much you're willing to pay for him going into the season. That's what I really like about auction is the fact that it's everybody's starting from scratch, essentially, and you pay as much as you want to pay for who you want. You're building your team that way.
Yeah, instead of reaching, that he reached 2 rounds too early. It's out of your salary. So you reaching genuinely costs you in other areas.
And when you got guys that are spending top dollar on the top players who inevitably some will end up getting hurt and miss half the season or all the season. Meanwhile, you're sitting there with your full wad of cash to spend and, you can take your pick as to who you want to grab the further along the auction process gets. And that's another thing I love about it is you really give yourself an opportunity to find those values, those steals.
Yeah, it's all about depth too. You're not stopping in round 15. You're stopping in round 25.
Yeah.
So it's different. You got to look at rookies. You got to understand it's not a beginner thing by any means. It's more of an advanced.
Yep. I've been asked this question before, and, I've appeared on other people's shows, other people's podcasts, talking fantasy football, Brian, and one of the questions that always comes up is, if somebody doesn't really have a history with fantasy football and they want to jump in all of a sudden, maybe it's a young man or woman that wants to get involved, or maybe it's somebody that's a little older but just has never done it and all of a sudden goes, hey, I kind of want to try this. They ask, what would you suggest, auction or snake draft? And my answer is always snake draft because I think everybody should have to experience, and not that it's a bad thing, experience what a snake draft is all about. For me, a snake draft league is like Christmas morning. More so than the auction thing, because that's more of a longer process. The snake draft, you're getting guys together. There's a certain amount of time you get to make each pick. You have to strategize who you think's going to get picked in between your picks, and there's just a lot more to it. And that's why I think initially, when you're first getting started, the snake draft is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, you're not going to fail because you're going to pick people. There's an auto draft feature which automatically ranks the highest value up there.
I picked Cairo Santos in the first round.
Yeah, so it's set up so you can't just do something completely horrible. So it's very user friendly, it's forgiving. There's lots of things like that are in there to prevent those things.
And the thing I like about a snake draft, too, and it depends on the league, I suppose, Brian, but a lot of times your draft position, if it's not completely random, as in like a startup league or a complete redraft where you're not keeping anybody, let's say, I would say most leagues probably have the type of league where it's determined by how you finished the year before. So year over year over year, the last pick of the draft probably goes to the league champion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Has to.
Right. Have you ever heard of this third round reversal type of snake draft?
No.
Okay. So what that is essentially is instead of going 1 to 12, 12 to 1, 1 to 12, 12 to 1, 1 to 12, 12 to 1, it keeps going. When you get to the third round, it reverses. So you go 1 to 12, 12 to 1. And then for the third round, you go back to the way it was, or you go 1 to 12, 12 to 1, 1 to 12, 1 to 12, 12 to 1.
That's dumb.
Why is that dumb? People do that.
Because why are you making a hybrid? Because you were mad because you didn't get to draft in a certain spot?
You realize I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah, because it's stupid.
I've heard of people that fight for this.
Yeah, I hate it when people make these hybrid rules like, well, it's not fair. You won the draft league, so this is what happens.
Right.
This is what happens. You want to do it fair then? Start over at the beginning of every single round then. So if you won the league, then you're going to draft last every single round because that's the reality of football.
But Brian, I feel bad for the guy who keeps finishing last every single year. You know,
Well, he gets to pick first.
He keeps getting handed all the great positions. And what about the rest of us? We always get stuck at the tail end.
Fantasy football isn't won in rounds 1 through 4. It's won in rounds 10 through 15.
I say keep it simple. I've always been that type of guy. If I ever was a commissioner in any league, I would suggest if you're doing a snake draft, 1 to 12, 12 to 1, 1 to 12, 12 to 1.
I don't like people who fight about waivers, you know, the starting order of the waivers.
Mm-hmm.
I just let the program deal with it because it's one less thing I got to deal with. And, like, if that's the best thing you got to complain about because you don't understand why XYZ got the first-round waiver, but you're the guy who won the league last year, so you're not getting waiver number 1.
How about roster composition? Here's something where we might disagree. I think I could do without kickers now at this point. I will go on record as saying fantasy kickers do not matter anymore, okay? I hate scoring systems where they're constantly docking for like missed kicks and things like that.
So I don't do missed
annoying.
kicks because that's not the kicker's fault all the time.
And it's not, and that's what I was just going to say. Okay, so I can do without the kicker. I think I'd like to keep defense a part of the fantasy game, but maybe go more IDP heavy. Then I would maybe have you pick one defensive lineman, one linebacker, one D-back. So one from each of the 3 levels of defense, essentially. As far as composition goes, I'm a 1 quarterback league kind of guy. Not really a big fan of 2 quarterback leagues or what they would call super flex. I like leagues that you can start 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, and a defense, I guess. I don't care for leagues that have multiple flex spots.
Like mine?
I don't care for that. And this is where I said we might disagree.
So
I think you're bailing people out that had a bad draft or weren't prepared for it.
So for mine, we do 1 quarterback, 1 running back is required. Then we have 3 wide receiver tight end spots because I don't believe in the locking in the tight end. Because if you don't get one of the 3, you're getting less than 5 points a week.
Another thing we'll disagree on, but go ahead.
So we have 3 wide receiver tight end flex, and then you have 1 final one that's wide receiver, running back, or tight end. So you get that variance. I don't like going into the linemen's, the linebackers, all that stuff. You get an IDP and you get a defense. And yes, kicking is a part of the game. Points are scored there. They will always be a part of a fantasy football roster.
Brian and I have so many disagreements in that run-on sentence.
But I do not penalize for missed kicks.
That's good.
I'm also a realist and say, God, when it's kicking into the wind, a 63-yard field goal in the rain, that's not that guy's fault. It's just 1 second left in the half, and they need to kill that second. So they're going to wing it on a prayer to get 3 points. That's not the kicker's fault. That's garbage. I don't like that.
Or if a coach trots out his kicker to try a ridiculous 70-yard field goal.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the half
in
or something.
Denver in the altitude.
Right. So they trot him out there, and you're not going to make that. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like Jason Elam, and who was the other guy that did the 63? It was Elam.
Matt Prater.
And Matt Prater was the other one. And this was
Lion.
back when Prater was kicking for Denver.
Mm-hmm.
So he tied that record. Was there somebody else that did a 63 or no?
The dude with half a foot from way back in, or was he 62? And then
it wasn't 63.
Jason Hansen kicked a 63-yarder in his 20-some years,
Wow.
or 62 maybe.
Wow. Okay. Well, I guess kickers do matter, Brian. According to Brian, they do.
They do.
I think
Absolutely.
fantasy could do without them because I think they're a dime a dozen. They all kind of do the same thing. You know, maybe only one kicker per year will kind of set himself apart from the rest. And I don't know. Tight ends will have that fight some other time because I think if you're spending that kind of draft capital to get one of those top guys, you're missing out on potentially big guys at running back, at quarterback, at certainly at wide receiver in those, early to middle rounds. So there's something you're giving up for drafting that guy. So I think that tight ends are still important. Anyway, we'll have that chat another time. I want to talk offensive line. We had somebody on the Sleeper Bot app. We threw it out there and said, what do you want to hear about on the show? They said, offensive line. So we'll break it down coming up next. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM ESPN Radio. You are listening to the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. I'm Andy Hall. That's Brian Eikenberry. You can get our show any number of ways. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher/Google Play. We're on ESPNDesMoines.com. That's our radio home online. And we kindly thank you for listening, no matter how you found us. Brian's on Twitter at IkeFFB. That's IKEFFB. I'm on Twitter at Andy Hall Radio. Tweet us at 515 Fantasy. We love interacting with you. And don't forget, we also now have a Patreon page where you can help the show out financially and get some cool perks in exchange. Brian, do you want to just give us a synopsis of that?
Yeah, don't forget Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com. Search for 515 Fantasy Football. We've got those 3 specials out there. The early bird, that's the $5. You're going to get your bargain bin picks 24 hours in advance. Your $10 phase is a Sunday morning starts and sits. You're going to get access to us, private access to us on Sunday mornings, an hour before kickoff, to help you with your starts and sit questions and why we feel that way. And then the $20 Saturday night special, we're going to give you the Sunday morning starts and sits, the early bird, when we're going to give you a once-a-week roster overhaul. So if you're in a league that's got some decent cash, you need to think about your investments and let us help you win. Let us help you capitalize. We've done it before. We hear it from people at the end of the season. Let us help you now.
Yeah, one of my coworkers at the Radio Ranch who had never participated in fantasy football ever is one of our sales guys, and he was invited to partake in the Radio Group League last year, and they thought he'd be easy money. He listened to our show. He took our advice. He won the league.
That's awesome.
In his first year.
That's awesome.
One of those phenomenal stories. We love those stories. If you want to share your success story with us, Twitter's a great place to do it. We have a Facebook page as well. And I didn't mention this, but we have a channel on the Sleeper Bot app. My dog's got fleas.
Yeah, we got an Ollie too.
Ollie is making so much noise in the studio here tonight, the basement studio. I'm starting to worry about the guy. I don't know if he's got fleas or what, but okay. Anyway, we're on Sleeper Bot, so definitely check out our channel there. One suggestion I got when I asked the question of what would you like Brian and I to cover on a future show was offensive line. Now, here's something that you might disagree with, Brian, but I think the real strength of schedule isn't strength of schedule because you're dealing basically with old...
last year's stuff.
Yes. Offensive lines. We're dealing with the here and now. There are actual metrics you can look at for each player that help you grade an overall offensive line, not only in terms of run blocking, but pass blocking. So I think an offense's success or failure depends somewhat on their offensive line.
Yeah, look at Minnesota last year.
Right. It's a very good example.
Look at why Detroit's never had a run game. We have good pass blockers for Matt Stafford who can throw for 4,500 to 5,000 yards every single year, but we can't get a run game going because we have had terrible run blockers.
Bingo. You got the New Orleans Saints. Similar situation.
Sure.
Terrible run blocking, great pass blocking, keep Drew Brees safe. Drew Brees can throw for 5,000 plus yards, 40 plus touchdowns, and remain upright for the most part. So, yeah. So what I want to do is kind of go over the offensive line ranks, kind of where I see them. Everybody always ranks Dallas number one. Now, Dallas I rank number one in terms of run blocking. So a guy like Ezekiel Elliott or whoever ends up running in Dallas has a leg up because he's got an excellent run blocking offensive line. Their pass blocking grade, not nearly as solid in my opinion, but Dallas overall has got to be considered one of the top 3 offensive lines in the game. I put them right up there with an offensive line like Tennessee's. Tennessee, fantastic run blocking, which will ultimately help a guy like DeMarco Murray. Yes, it will maybe help Derrick Henry as well if he gets some carries. I think this year going to be very similar to what we saw last year in terms of those splits. But the Tennessee Titans are very good as far as run blocking. They're so-so, little above average maybe, at pass blocking. Tennessee, Dallas, I really, really, really like Buffalo's offensive line for run blocking as well. And this is one reason, Brian, why I keep finding myself finding reasons to bump LaShawn McCoy up in my rankings. Now, one reason I would bump him down is because of his age and his injury history. I'm a little bit concerned about that, especially the age with LaShawn McCoy. But he's the guy that does everything in that offense. It all kind of centers around him, and he has an excellent run-blocking offensive line there in Buffalo.
Yeah, when you're going to get 20 catches a game and 5 passes, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of action. And
Carries, you mean, not catches.
No, I said 20 touches and 5 catches.
Okay, I think I said 20 catches.
Probably did. I don't know. He might have 20 catches. Who knows?
Maybe. So again, I'm looking at Dallas. I'm looking at Tennessee. I'm looking at Buffalo. Some of my other favorite run-blocking offensive lines include the Chicago Bears, which might help Jordan Howard. Now, I knocked Jordan Howard down a bit and ranked guys like Jay Ajayi ahead of him because I think Ajayi is a better pass catcher. Howard's not known for that at all. You saw his average rush last year was up over 5 yards per carry. I mean, that's pretty amazing in the NFL for a guy.
It's not going to be there this year.
That might not be the case this year, no, because they might be able to focus more on that running game and stack the box. But the Chicago Bears have a very good offensive line up front that will undoubtedly make some holes for Jordan Howard, no question about that. Those are kind of the elite offensive lines as far as run blocking goes. I think Cleveland is up there for me as well, which will help Isaiah Crowell, a guy that I'm seeing creep up and up and up everybody's ADP. He's now a borderline running back 1 now for people in drafts, which just a few weeks ago I never would have thought would have been possible. I constantly was seeing Isaiah Crowell as sort of a high-end running back 2, volume play, pass-catching ability, great offensive line, and here I am talking myself into moving him up again, which is probably why that's happening in ADP. How do you think things are working out there in Cleveland?
They've always had a good offensive line. They just never had a good supporting cast, which I think is going to be Chicago's problem this year. You also have to take that with a grain of salt. If they have nobody throwing the ball and they have nobody catching the ball, they can put 8 people on the line and make it very difficult to run the ball, regardless of how good the line is.
A couple of teams that have made some big improvements, at least in my opinion, in the offseason include the Los Angeles Rams, which, we saw what happened last year on a bad offense with Todd Gurley, a guy that many considered could be the number 1 running back and was drafted that way by several people. Big-time disappointment, part of the reason, terrible offense, not a good offensive line in front of him. Todd Gurley, candidate for a bounce back this season, I think, due to some of the improvements they've made along the offensive front, and I think Jared Goff's got that first year under his belt now, maybe play a little bit better, and, hopefully they can find some pass catchers in that Los Angeles Rams offense. Minnesota is another team I look at as sort of a team on the improve as far as the offensive line goes. They were god-awful last year. I mean, make no bones about it. They were just terrible. A guy like Dalvin Cook in that backfield, man, I think could do very, very cool things in his first year. Everybody's talking about Fournette, Mixon, McCaffrey. Cook tends to be the 4th guy, the 4th wheel, if you will, of the rookie running backs. But due to those offensive line improvements, due to Sam Bradford's accuracy numbers from last year and what I think he's capable of and that receiving core that's emerging, including Kyle Rudolph, who had a great year last year at tight end, Minnesota could be a team you could be surprised by. You might not think could contend as they probably will this year. Probably not for the division. I'd be surprised. Maybe more for a wild card spot. But that Minnesota offensive line, at least in terms of run blocking, I think is definitely an improvement. As far as pass blocking goes and keeping quarterbacks upright, I think there's no question Pittsburgh's got one of the better offensive lines. Big Ben, we've seen him, kept upright for the most part and not running for his life, which is a kind of a goofy thing to watch, isn't it? A big guy like Ben Roethlisberger running around.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's running or more like a
They're stumbling.
broken-legged horse trying to trot across the finish line.
Oakland, I think, has one of the better pass blocking offensive lines, which is great for Derek Carr and his health going forward. I like Philadelphia's offensive line. New England, certainly. Tom Brady, got to keep the franchise safe. I mentioned New Orleans earlier. Arizona's got one of those offensive lines that, they might not be the best run blockers. They've got an elite running back in David Johnson making a lot of that opportunity. But pass blocking, I think, is a strength for the Arizona Cardinals. And, I mean, do you really want me to go down the list of the worst? The Niners, the Bengals, the Seahawks, the Jets. These are teams that are going to see running backs with no room to run and quarterbacks running for their lives. And in the terms of Seattle, that's part of my argument for why I think Russell Wilson might be in for a pretty nice year this year. He's going to be running for his life because that offensive line is just god-awful. So anyway, there you go. Just a little bit of a rundown of offensive line talk. Hopefully you can use that when ranking your players. Take a look at, I'm going to publish something about offensive lines at ESPNDesMoines.com. Look for that in the next couple of days. Hey, Brian.
Hey.
The pop quiz is coming up.
Ooh, easy money.
3 of tough fantasy's toughest questions. Rapid fire at Brian next on 515 Fantasy Football on 1350 AM ESPN Radio. The 515 Fantasy Football Show, heard each and every Thursday from 11 to 1 on ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa. That's 1350 AM on the dial. Maybe you're getting us digitally. We're available in several different places: Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play. We're on ESPNDesMoines.com. We're on Brian's forehead because we've started renting out space there. So Brian's willing to get a tattoo on his forehead if you're willing to pay the price.
Yeah, hey, money talks, man. I'm not scared.
Right now it says ESPNDesMoines.com, so it's kind of a free plug for us.
I'll also need a wife with your payment as well because I'll be losing one.
Love it. We've gone to the portion of the program, Brian, where we throw 3 tough questions at you and let you answer off the top of your head, most of the time incorrectly. And then I come back and tell you why you're wrong, and it's fun.
We'll see.
The pop quiz, my friends. Preseason week 2, which actually is preseason week 1 because aside from the Hall of Fame game,
Yawn.
everybody else is now underway. Week 1
yeah,
of
we're
preseason.
going now. Giddy up.
It's fun, though, isn't it?
I look at things probably through a different lens just because they always structure the games a little bit differently every year. So I really focus on yards per carry, tackles, things like that. Especially so if I'm looking at like IDPs, for example, I'm looking at certain linebackers that I kind of figure are going to be in the game for tackles and how many tackles are these people getting, things like that. I'm watching that stuff. We just talked about offensive line. Those offensive linemen do not sit during preseason games.
Nope.
They are in there working on their cohesiveness as a unit. So you can watch that stuff, and if the line is just letting people through, that's an issue.
Yeah. I love preseason. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a chance to see guys on the field and see how they react in certain situations. I don't need to see the studs. I don't need to see guys that I know are going to be just fine.
Yeah, it's good to see rookies to see if they're playing up to the speed of the NFL.
Very true. So I don't complain much about it. I know they don't like the length of the preseason, players in general, but I understand why they do it. The coaching staffs will never complain because the more chances they get to see their guys and determine who the absolute best are, power to them. Speaking of which, had a conversation with my GM at the radio station today. He was pretty certain that they're only doing 1 round of cuts this year in the NFL, as opposed to the 2 that they've traditionally done. Is that true?
Yeah. So
it's just 1.
Yeah,
Wow.
They don't have that trim down where it's like, okay, we're going from 90 to 75, then down to 53.
Right.
It's 90 to 53.
Wow.
Yeah.
So one day, every locker room in the NFL will have like
Gets cut by 40%.
Probably almost 40 pink tags in lockers. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it makes sense because, like, well, I'm not ready. You cut down all this extra preseason stuff. I'm not ready to make a decision that fast on 15 guys.
Yeah. Well, they're only seeing them in practice for the most part, and then I guess maybe there were a case where maybe they got some action in one preseason game, maybe two, and then all of a sudden they're getting cut or put down, down to the practice squad, and yeah, it's just brutal. But yeah, from 90-something down to 53 is, whew, it's cutting a lot of weight. Cutting a lot of weight there. But they're waiting till the last minute, I guess, to do that big cut. So
100%.
That's the deal. Okay, I was just checking to make sure. All right, Brian, the first pop quiz question. Will any of Seattle Seahawks running backs achieve more than half the team's total touches at the position?
No.
Nobody will reach 51% of the touches for all running backs in Seattle.
No.
Okay, why?
Because I believe they'll use 4 starting running backs this year.
You think 4?
Yeah.
Wow.
At some point throughout the season, they will have 4 different starting running backs.
Is that because you think somebody will pop in and deserve that shot, or will it be because somebody like Thomas Rawls gets hurt?
They're going to be rotating, trying to find that person, but then also the people that are there have always been hurt at some point in their season.
Yeah,
so.
Procise did last year. Rawls, certainly we know his injury history. And Eddie Lacy, well, he can make all these weight goals he wants. He's still fat. We went from beast mode in Seattle to feast mode. How about that? Feast mode is Eddie Lacy. I will never refer to him as Eddie Lacy going forward. It'll always be feast mode from here on out, okay? The answer, of course, is no. This 3-headed backfield will likely be led by Thomas Rawls in between the 20s on early downs. I say he probably gets around 200 carries. That's probably a ceiling for him. CJ Procise passing downs primarily, although I say, Procise in PPR leagues could be a steal. I think he's capable of more than 50 receptions in the season if healthy. Eddie Lacy remains to be seen what his involvement's going to be. I've heard reports as recent as today that Thomas Rawls is running with the ones and Eddie Lacy is not. So maybe Lacy's a specialty type of guy that they bring in to bang inside the 5 or something. I don't know. It could be. Maybe he'll be a blocking fullback.
Never know.
Yeah. None of these 3, by the way, should be considered anything more than a running back 3, no matter the scoring format, due to timeshare and terrible offensive line, as we've mentioned earlier in this show. Now, who's that 4th running back for you? Is it Alex Collins?
Just someone they have to pick up.
Okay, so it doesn't matter who, just somebody.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not being held to names here.
I'm just saying, if you're going to throw that out there, I thought maybe you'd have somebody in mind, when they got what the hell's his name? Tom Hagen from The Godfather. Okay. Well, when they never mind. I'm going to move on to question number 2. Roughly 400 pass completions should be expected from Patriots quarterback Tom Brady, assuming a full 16-game slate. And remember, he did not get that last season due to the 4-game suspension he started the season with. But I've looked at Brady's history, roughly 400 pass completions in a decent year for him. Gronk, Edelman, James White, Deion Lewis, Gillislee, Burkhead, Cooks. Lots of mouths to feed. Who will lead the Patriots in receptions in 2017?
Gronk.
Why?
Because he's going to be healthy, and he's his favorite target. He's the only one who can't be covered. Everybody else can. I will pick Gronk in the first round again.
You're wrong.
Okay.
The answer is Julian Edelman. The only one that's ever
You
caught...
mean the guy who can't catch passes anymore?
The only one that's ever caught more than 92 passes in any one season, and he's done it 3 times as a New England Patriot. Cook's high water mark was 2015 with 84 receptions. Gronk's was 90. That was 6 seasons ago, Brian.
Well, one guy's in jail, and then he was hurt 2 years, so he's fine.
Gronk's a different tight end in 2017 than he was in 2011, I'll tell you that. So... if anyone can snag 20 to 25% of Brady's throws, it's Edelman, a guy that's proven that he's elusive enough, speedy enough, and got Brady's trust. I think he's the guy that leads the team in receptions in 2017. I look forward to going back to this question and referring back to it at the end of the season when Edelman indeed ends up becoming the number 1 receiver in receptions in New England. Question number 3, Brian. Cam Newton was the number 1 scoring quarterback in 2015. He regressed to number 19 at the position last season. Will the 2017 edition be closer to Cam 15 or Cam 16?
I'm going to go Cam 16. Why?
Why?
Look, they've said you're not running anymore. You're doing this. You're going to be a passing quarterback. This is what you have to do because we need to protect you. When you go diving head first and get hit, the running is over at this point. Cam 2015 requires a lot of running. Therefore, I rule on Cam 2016.
Correct answer is Cam 16, especially after he sustained the concussion near the goal line against Atlanta last year that you alluded to. Coaching staff in Carolina absolutely making a concerted effort to keep that from happening. A lot less running for Cam, who went from 132 rushing attempts to only 90. And after that concussion, it was almost nothing. He saw passing numbers regress as well between 15 and 16. I'm comfortable with Cam as my second quarterback to start in spots in a good matchup, but with the likelihood that the offensive scheme changes to help keep Cam healthy, I don't think he'll resemble the 2015 Cam at all. You did reasonably well this time around.
Yay.
Brian. I'm reasonably proud of you. And I still can't come up with the name of that actor off the top of my head. But my point that I was going to make was that directors and writers have an idea in their head of who is going to play roles in movies before they even put the feelers out and ask if, an agent would like, to see a script. They have somebody in mind already is my point. And I thought maybe you had somebody in mind as well and just weren't sharing the name. Like Alex Collins, for example, in that Seattle backfield.
I don't know.
That just went completely over you, right?
Yeah.
Like a 747, right?
Yeah.
It's okay, Brian. I forgive you. You're still my friend.
Yay.
All right, we got a few more segments left. Well, of course, we're going to wrap up with the 515 Fantasy Flea Flicker, in which Brian and I get to talk about whatever we want, which is kind of what we do periodically through the show anyway. But we try to focus on fantasy football for you. Important handcuffs. Handcuffs we care about. We're going to talk about that before the end of the show. But up next, Brian and I unveil our first round of super sleepers that will help you win your fantasy league. That is next. You don't want to miss it. 515 Fantasy Football. You're hearing it on 1350 AM ESPN Radio. You are listening to the 515 Fantasy Football Show on 1350 AM ESPN Radio, on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, Google Play, ESPNDesMoines.com, our home online. I'm Andy Hall. That's Brian Eikenberry. Again, we love when you reach out to us, whether it's for advice or just general conversation, praise. We like that. We are at 515 Fantasy on Twitter. I am at Andy Hall Radio. He is at Ike FFB. That's IKEFFB. We're on Facebook as well. And I don't know what else to tell you. Lots of ways to get a hold of your guys. And Brian and I are certainly that. So feel free to reach out anytime. We'll get back to you 100% of the time. It's time, speaking of which, Brian, to unveil our first round of Super Sleepers.
Super sleepy? Super sleepers.
All right. I wish I had like a big sound effect there with like fireworks or something.
It's not in the budget. Sorry.
Well, maybe we can talk somebody with fireworks into sponsoring that. Yeah. How about that for an idea?
Boom.
All right. So what we're going to do is go through the major positions, and that's, of course, quarterback, running back, and a pass catcher or two, and unveil some guys that are bargains at their current ADP or guys that you think will definitely outperform their ADP. And then why, too, is another important reason. I want a reason
that's
why.
Terrible.
I know, right? You just want to throw the names out there. I'm going to begin at the quarterback position, and let's see if you can figure this out as I go along, okay? I'm sort of going to tease you with this presentation. My first quarterback, my first super sleeper at that position, a guy currently going late 10th round, 14th quarterback off the board. He's averaged over 4,500 yards passing in his last 6 NFL seasons, 28 passing and nearly 2 rushing touchdowns per season over that span.
Matt Stafford.
You got it. A guy that finished 2016 as the number 7 quarterback in fantasy scoring, whose supporting cast largely still intact. He's my quarterback 8 on my draft board, a perennial steal in my opinion. He is Detroit Lions Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, I can't imagine that like actually happening. Like if I was in a draft and he was the 14th pulled off the board, like I would be happy to take Matt Stafford that late and be just fine with it.
Late 10th round in a 12-team league.
Take it. Take it every single time.
That's incredible, because then you're loading up on running backs and pass
Yeah.
catchers in the first 9 rounds.
Yep, I'll take it.
Me too. You got a quarterback for me?
So my super sleeper is Deshaun Watson.
Oh, do tell.
Do tell.
Saw him for the first time last night, by the way. Got to see him in action against Carolina.
Yeah, well, I think he has a decent opportunity here. I know they're savage, but look, Houston isn't afraid to move on from somebody. They've proven that regardless of how much money they spend on him, Brock.
Dude, I got news for you. That AFC South, it's a winnable division.
It is.
So if Savage comes in, he's not doing the job. Why not give it to Watson?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So, I mean, you've got Lamar Miller, you've got DeAndre Hopkins, you've got a decent staff, you've got a defense that's going to support you as long as their stars stay healthy and play up to speed. So, he left Clemson with over 10,000 yards. And, oh, by the way, he almost had 2,000 yards rushing there. So, I think he's going to be okay. I'm not saying he's Dak Prescott wasn't even, good on paper. Dak was good because of Zeke. So, I think he's a sleeper quarterback that I would consider, if I had the roster space and I was confident of, if I was taking 2 quarterbacks, making him your number 2.
Yeah, I've got him as a low-end number 2 right now in my rankings, and I think that's fine for now, but I think there is some upside there, Brian. And the intangible, the X factor, you didn't mention. Deshaun Watson is a winner. He's been a winner at every level thus far, including his time at Clemson, of course. So, you bring a guy like that into Houston, and I think, you're setting yourself up when you give him a chance. If you can just allow him to play and not micromanage him, because we see that a lot with young quarterbacks, and it kind of ruins them. If they could just let the kid play, and I think they did that in Clemson largely, kid's a winner. He's a proven winner.
Nailed it.
How about another super sleeper at quarterback from yours truly? How about a guy going mid-13th round, 20th quarterback off the board, that has passed for over 4,000 yards in his last 4 healthy seasons? Now, that's 4 of the last 5.
That Big Ben?
Only 2 seasons removed from a nearly 4,700-yard, 35-touchdown year. Ben has never reached those numbers. That has the consensus number 1 player in the fantasy game in his backfield, and a vastly underrated
Carson
cast
Palmer
of
is
pass
not
catchers at his disposal. He is the Arizona Cardinals' Carson Palmer.
Nope.
In the mid-13th round, you wouldn't take him?
No.
You're crazy.
Maybe.
I love that value for Carson Palmer. That is a huge value. And I don't
I'll
think
take Cody Kessler over Carson.
Oh, you're nuts.
Palmer.
You're absolutely crazy. That's like me last year saying RG3 was going to be a QB2. That's your RG3 will be Cody Kessler, dude. I can't believe that you don't really think that, do you?
No, but I don't like Carson Palmer.
You might not, but remember, he's got a running back that people have to account for. I mentioned earlier, they're not the best run-blocking offensive line, but they are pretty decent at pass protection in Arizona. Keep Carson Palmer upright because he's sure as hell not mobile. He's got a great cast in wide, of receivers. Very underrated, I'd argue. Larry Fitzgerald is one of those guys I could list as a super sleeper, theoretically. They've got John Brown there. As long as the sickle cell trait doesn't come back to bite him again this year, he'll be fine. Then they got guys like J.J. Nelson and then that rookie kid that they drafted too. There's a number of guys in Arizona that can do the job. And they're not focused on Carson Palmer and that passing game because of David Johnson. And they got a good defense, so the team is going to be in most games. They can do whatever they want.
We literally wasted 2 minutes talking about Carson Palmer.
All right, buddy. We'll move on to running back. Do you have one?
Rex Burkhead.
Rex Burkhead, New England Patriots.
We're talking super sleepers.
Why, though? Here's my question about Rex Burkhead. Who the hell is Rex Burkhead? I mean, I know who he is, but what has he done to make him a super sleeper?
It's a super sleeper, so that means he's flying under the radar of most people.
I totally agree. Again, bargain at his ADP.
He's the second biggest running back on the roster to Mike Gillislee. Gillislee fails, it's Burkhead. Also, Burkhead is a blocker. He's a blocking running back. He's really good at it. He can also run in between the tackles and catch passes.
Such an underrated statistic or metric, I should say, about
It keeps him in the game.
backs.
It keeps him on the field.
If your pass protection is solid, you're going to see the field. There's no question about it. It's one thing about overrating rookie running backs. They're not quite used to pass protection yet, and that's why they don't see the field as much up right away. And that's why I guarantee you this is why Leonard Fournette isn't given the keys to that offense completely early on. I think Chris Ivory's involved. TJ Elder will be involved because Fournette's not ready in the pass protection game. I guarantee that's why.
Oh, I wouldn't agree. So Rex Burkhead.
Burkhead, though. See, but again, he's done nothing to really,
Neither has Gillislee.
Oh, Gillislee scored a handful of touchdowns, and all he was a backup to LaShawn McCoy, who, by the way, barely ever left the field.
So if he doesn't win the starting role, if he doesn't do it, Burkhead's going to fill in his role.
I don't trust Bill Belichick. I don't trust the Patriots backfield. I don't trust the Patriots, period. I think Tom Brady's about the only one I'm really comfortable taking, and he even is going way too early this year for me. So, Rex Burkhead. Interesting. Brian, we're going to make a little note here. Yeah, no, we're going to make a note here. Rex Burkhead. Brian, if he's your Gary Barnidge, you have that bragging right. Brian still has yet to find himself a Gary Barnidge. We got to do that for you. Maybe it's Rex Burkhead.
I got one more, too.
My running back, a bell cow that has rushed for over 1,000 yards in 9 of his last 11 seasons. A guy that has played in every game since 2011. Hasn't missed one.
Frank Gore?
You got it.
Ah!
Roughly 8 touchdowns per season over that stretch. A guy that is currently the 35th running back drafted.
Jesus.
That's a late 7th-round pick.
Won't
That's
be in my
Indianapolis Colt Frank Gore. And yes, I am absolutely happy taking Frank Gore as my running back 2. No question about it.
You bet.
He's being drafted as like a running back 3 though, which is just crazy because he's done it. Here's the problem: people don't want to be late on a guy like Frank Gore. If this is the year he tanks, people are like, well, I walked away from him at the right time, didn't I?
Mm-hmm.
And people like me will be standing there going, damn, I wish I would have quit on him last year. I can't quit on Frank Gore. I just can't. I don't care how old he is. All right. You said you have another running back. Can you make it quick?
Running back, D'Angelo Henderson of the Denver Broncos.
Wow.
If Jamal Charles doesn't make it, C.J. Anderson, what? Devontae Booker, who?
Wow.
Super sleeper, D'Angelo Henderson.
All right, man. We'll mark that
solid
one down.
pass catching skills. Just
Is he
saying.
really going to help people win championships, do you think?
If you have Jamal Charles, or if you're just sitting there.
I'm not even sold that Jamal Charles is going to make the team.
No, here's the thing, though. If you have the extra spots, you grab one of these super sleepers, injury happens. Oh, well, I'm not trading for his replacement. And he comes out of the gate and runs for 100 yards. Whoops, you got some sweet trade bait.
Guess so. Wide receivers. I've got a handful of these. Maybe we can drag this into the next segment, Brian, because this is an intriguing segment, is it not? Talking sleepers, super sleepers, guys you can get at a bargain this year that I think will way outperform their ADP. I mean, these are like some of the most glaring, in my opinion.
I even had a dumb Viking in it.
Great. Well, I can't wait to hear all about your dumb Viking. So we got 2 segments left. We'll the last segment, of course, will be the flea flicker. So Brian and I will just rapid fire talk about whatever we want to talk about, and that's just fun. Next segment, I wanted to talk about handcuffs we care about. That might only be worth half a segment because I don't think there's a ton of them this year.
No.
So maybe let's just drag pass catchers. That could be tight ends.
Okay.
Definitely wide receivers, though. We're going to drag that super sleepers into the next segment. So I want to make sure our listeners don't miss out on that because there's some crazy value to be had in pass catchers, particularly at the wide receiver position, Brian. I have not seen bargains like these, I don't think, in all of my years of fantasy football. I am totally impressed with some of these, and I am convinced some of these will help you win your championship. Stick around for it. 515 Fantasy Football. You're hearing us on 1350 AM ESPN Radio. This is the 515 Fantasy Football Show. We are on 1350 AM ESPN Radio in Des Moines, Iowa. Our radio home is online as well at espndesmoines.com. The show available digitally on Apple Podcasts /iTunes, on Stitcher /Google Play. Lots of different ways you can get our show. We do appreciate you listening. Just a couple segments left of this episode. I'm Andy Hall. That's Brian Eikenberry. As we discussed a few moments ago, we are going to drag our super sleepers into this segment before we talk about a few handcuffs we think are important this season. And I think handcuffs have become a much less important thing over time. And that might have something to do with the committee backfields and whatnot. You agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's more value in wide receivers that are deep.
Mm-hmm.
Handcuffs are only so-so, and they only really pan out if it's really good.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really exist anymore.
D'Angelo Williams.
Probably
the last great example, right?
Yeah, other than that, it's kind of over.
I mean, if Ezekiel Elliott gets suspended for 6 games, is Darren McFadden going to be a great handcuff? I don't know. We'll talk about handcuffs here in a bit. The other thing I want to mention real quick before we dive into our pass catcher super sleepers, Robert Duvall. Thank you.
Oh, that's cute.
All right. So my first wide receiver super sleeper is the 33rd wide receiver off the board, early 7th round, a guy that has averaged over 85 receptions his last 3 seasons, nearly 1,200 yards,
Golden Tate,
a total of 14 touchdowns, and remains one of 2 stud options in the Denver Broncos offense.
Emmanuel Sanders.
Emmanuel freaking Sanders, the forgotten man. I will have him in pretty much every league, I guarantee it.
I had him last year and won. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't.
And that's how it's going to be. But, I mean, look at those numbers. He's, nearly 1,200 yards per season his last 3 seasons, 14 touchdowns over 3 seasons. That's not bad.
I think his success is tied to Demarius's failures.
You don't think the two can coexist as in like a good example of this last year would have been Jordy Nelson and Devontae Adams. Or I think there were 2 of those guys from the Saints, Michael Thomas and Brandon Cooks.
The last time they coexisted was with Peyton Manning as their quarterback.
Okay.
So last year they didn't have a good quarterback and they did not coexist very well.
What's changed?
Nothing. So the fact
except for the fact that they're probably maybe a little bit better than last year, right?
Or it's the same quarterback situation, so they're not going to coexist again.
So wouldn't that be more dependent on the quarterback play than, say, Demaryius Thomas not performing? I mean, Demaryius Thomas, granted, and I've got him ranked really high. He's a borderline number 1 wide receiver for me. But Emmanuel Sanders, at the value, I'd rather have him.
Look, I'm not questioning that at all.
Right, okay.
Zay Jones, wide receiver, Buffalo Bills.
I like that. You know what? I can't remember the number. I mentioned it when we did our post-draft show back in May. His number of receptions last year in college was absolutely ridiculous. It was 150-something, I want to say.
Which means he can catch the ball.
He's very adept at catching a ball.
Robert Woods, who? Marquise Goodwin, who?
Woods is already in Los Angeles with the Rams.
So they're begging for something there, and he's one of those people who's going to go undrafted.
Especially now that Anquan Bolden signed with the Bills.
Yep.
Because I think most people are actually going to target Bolden if they're not willing to pay that high ADP price of a Sammy Watkins, who, by the way, tweaked something in his foot again. Oh, my God.
So, look, it's not that far out there that Zay Jones is going to be the number 2 receiver on that team because, hey, Anquan Bolden was
slot
great
guy
for touchdowns, and that was it.
And he'll do it again in Buffalo, slot guy. That's pretty much, he's going to be the possession over the middle guy that takes the hits. Whereas Zay Jones and Sammy Watkins are both the X and the Z receivers on the outside. And, those are going to be your home run guys. No question about it. So I kind of like that one, Brian. Way to go. 42nd wide receiver off the board. Early 9th round. Caught 69 passes for 1,059 yards and 7 touchdowns in relatively regular action last season. Circumstances really haven't changed all that much for this Los Angeles Chargers pass catcher. His name? Tyrell Williams. Tyrell, early 9th round, 42nd wide receiver off the board. A guy that scored 7 touchdowns last year with Phillip Rivers, who, by the way, is still under center for the Chargers. Yes, Keenan Allen's back, But I argue that Keenan Allen probably helps a guy like Tyrell Williams.
I'm kind of staying away from pass catchers out there.
For the Chargers?
Yeah.
Even like a Hunter Henry? Do you think Antonio Gates is still much of a factor there at tight end?
No.
Okay.
He's going to get it, bow out off to Hunter Henry. So they're splitting the season.
Gates only needs, 2 touchdowns to set the record? Okay, so that'll happen. Hunter Henry will be the new guy. Keenan Allen, injury risk. Get that. When he's healthy, he's fantastic. But are you willing to risk that for a guy who's currently going as a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2? I mean, it's a pretty big risk. But a guy like Tyrell Williams, I mean, I don't feel too bad about taking him in the 9th round if he's there.
No.
Here's a point where, at that point, he's probably my 4th or 5th wide receiver because I'm waiting on quarterback. You know that.
Yeah, I have better options.
In my first 8 picks, Brian, I'm going probably 4 running backs, 4 wide receivers. It's probably how it's going to end up becoming in the first 8. In that 9th round, there's Tyrell Williams. And if I've taken 4 running backs and 4 receivers, he's my 5th wide receiver. Maybe I got a tight end somewhere in there. He'll still be my 4th wide receiver. And again, a guy that went over 1,000 yards last season, 7 touchdowns with Phillip Rivers still in Los Angeles. I don't know. I like Tyrell Williams a lot. Do you have any more pass catchers by chance?
Michael Floyd.
Hey, now.
Michael Floyd. I kind of sexually whispered that in the microphone. It may not have come off okay.
I mean, here's a guy he had a nice ceiling there in Arizona. A guy that nobody's talking about in Minnesota.
Lots of trouble, lots of pain, stuff like that. But
Diggs and Thielen all day in Minnesota.
Zimmer likes him. Zimmer likes him for his ability.
Enough to say, I will slit your throat if I find out that you were drinking and driving or something like that. If you're lying to me, I'm going to slit your throat. Zimmer. Okay, so Michael, I'm going to take that one with a grain of salt. I'm not necessarily agreeing with you on that one, but I dig it. I'm writing it down. All right, my last one, 49th receiver off the board, late 10th round, flourished in an anemic offense in 2016, grabbing 68 passes for over 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns. He's a new face in a place that has the 3rd most vacated targets available, and arguably a better offense on the whole than where he was last year. He is the Cleveland Browns' Kenny Britt. How do you like Kenny Britt, late 10th round, as the 49th receiver off the board? Kenny Britt. Who else is there? Corey Coleman, we don't know much about. Who else is there in Cleveland? We don't even know the name of the tight end anymore. It's just...
Yeah, he was the draft pick.
I know, I'm just saying. Rookie tight ends do nothing.
Whatever.
Okay, so you're not agreeing or disagreeing with Kenny Britt.
No.
We always make fun of him because we think he's like 70 years old when in reality he's only like 29. But anyway, couple minutes left. Handcuffs. All right.
Oh, there's still those?
For me, because I mentioned Frank Gore, I'm probably targeting Marlon Mack as one of my last picks of the draft. If I have a Colts running back, Frank Gore, I'm taking Marlon Mack, who I think will be the guy after him. If I'm taking any Chiefs running back, I'm taking the guy with the most upside.
Rookie.
And I'm taking Kareem Hunt.
Yeah.
Do you want to grab Spencer Ware? I think at his ADP, he's a guy you completely ignore. This might be another Adrian Peterson, Mark Ingram type situation.
Yeah,
now that I think about it.
Let other people take him, and then you just sit back and pick up Kareem Hunt.
How about if you're a Ty Montgomery owner? Do you want any part of that rookie, Jamal Williams?
No.
You don't. I think Jamal Williams will surprise people. I think he'll contribute week 1 with a couple
Mike
of...
McCarthy
he'll score
makes you earn your roster spot.
I think Jamal Williams will score 2 touchdowns week 1 for the Packers. That's what I'm calling it. How about Samaje Perine? We've heard that he's had some fumbling issues. We've heard that he's had some ball security, some protection issues. Rob Kelly's going to start for Washington. Do you grab Perine for his upside? Because eventually he will become the guy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally. He was on one of my super deep sleepers that I really didn't push too much because I don't think he's really that big of a sleeper. I think people are going to draft him regardless.
What about Cincinnati? Everybody's drafting Joe Mixon, who I don't even think is guaranteed to see the field immediately. All the talent in the world.
I think he's gonna, but just as a pure fumbling risk for rookies, if you got Gio, you better have Mixon, or vice versa.
Any Patriots running back you like better than the other? I guess Burkhead, right?
Burkhead, he's my sleeper. You don't have to handcuff him because he's going to be out there no matter what on the waiver wire.
I say it depends on the situation. If you're in a PPR league, you might want to look at somebody like a James White or a Deion Lewis. But then again, that could just be a huge headache for you. That's really it, Brian. There's really no handcuffs to speak of, in my opinion. So take that for what it's worth. We are ready for the last segment, the 515 Fantasy Flea Flicker. It's next on 515 Fantasy Football. Final segment of this 515 Fantasy Football show, heard on 1350 AM, ESPN Radio, Des Moines, Iowa, on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, ESPNDesMoines.com, wherever you found us. We appreciate you giving us the time, and we are here to give you the best intel to help you win a fantasy championship. That said, we're always in touch. All you got to do is reach out. We're on Facebook, 515 Fantasy Football, Twitter, at 515 Fantasy. I'm at Andy Hall Radio. He's at Ike FFB. That's IKEFFB. Andy Hall, Brian Eikenberry. The 515 Fantasy Flea Flicker begins with some talk about the first annual, the inaugural, because there's no first annual. It's the inaugural.
Right.
515 Fantasy Football Listener League. How are we going to be choosing participants? Because Brian and I have already eaten up the first two spots.
So I think it's pretty simple. Look, it's really about your participation level. It's about what you're doing out there, not necessarily for us, but we can't just randomly pick somebody. So earn your street cred. If you want increased opportunities to get in this league, you need to be out there on Twitter. You need to follow. You need to tweet. You need to say hi. You need to head out to iTunes. You need to rate and review the show. It's not that hard. It takes 1 minute from your phone. Get out there. That's going to give you another entry into this pot. And then we got some loyalty listeners who's been around from the beginning. And I like snacks. So,
That will never
winks
hurt.
and nods.
Yeah, that will never hurt. Now, if you do a rate and review for us, again, those of you that have iPhones, iPads, that sort of thing, you're on iTunes /Apple Podcasts. And that is where we really need the help in terms of rates and reviews. Give us the 5-star, give us a nice review. Take a screenshot and then tweet it at us. That would probably be the best way. Now, some of you, granted, have already reached out and told us of your interest. And so that's been noted, okay? We get that. And thank you. Brian alluded to a couple of guys that have been with us since the very beginning. We know who you are, and you will be getting your invites, official invites into the league very soon. As far as who else it's going to be, I think Brian and I both agree. It's got to be up for grabs. Who wants it? You got to show us. Show us you want this thing, man.
First person to get in Patreon gets a league spot right now.
Well, I think that should probably go without saying. And actually, we should have put that in the perks or whatever. Like, if you enter this level, you are guaranteed a spot.
Right now, first person to get on Patreon and sign up for one of the 3 levels, you get a spot right now.
I mean, somebody's going to go do that now. So that's very cool, Brian. We're excited because, when we started doing this thing a few years ago, I don't think Brian or myself would have believed anybody if they said people would actually want to be in a listener league that has your fantasy show's name on it. I think Brian and I are both pretty grounded guys. I think it's pretty apparent by listening to our show. The entertainment comes from the disagreements and the fact that Brian and I are just 2 dudes. We're not on anybody's payroll. We're not trying to promote one guy over another because of something that, other than, what we think is going to happen fantasy-wise. So it's pure is what I'm trying to tell you.
And I love it that way.
Right.
It's fun. It's here. What's happening. Thanks for wanting the league. The reason we did it is because you guys wanted it. So we want you to be part of it. We want you to have fun. And you think you got the chops, come try and kick my butt.
Yeah. Just not going to happen, by the way. I like the fact that Brian and I are in separate divisions because that means we'll see each other, once in a season and then maybe in the title game, right?
Probably.
Wouldn't that be something if we get all the way to the end and it's me and you in the title game?
It just proves why you need to listen then.
I will probably put aside all of our regular format of the show at that point, and I will probably just do a big trash talk episode. Or maybe that could be a bonus thing, trash talk episode. I don't know. We're already planning ahead because Brian and I feel like there's no way you can beat us. So there's another incentive for you to go do what we told you to. You want to show us? Come on, show us.
I agree. It's that simple.
Yeah, that's what I like about fantasy football. It's that edge, that competition edge. Granted, some people take that too far, but I think most of it's in good fun. And we're seeing a little bit of that between the Sleeper Wire crew, all the podcast hosts and analysts and whatnot that are participating in that.
They're
pro-am.
scared.
I think they're all scared. Yeah, they don't know, man.
Train's rolling.
It's coming into the station, boys.
So, Flea Flicker, let's talk about Halloween, man. I'm pretty excited for Halloween.
Yeah, no, I love that time of year in general. For me, it's taking the kids out trick-or-treating. It's, costumes. It's all that good stuff.
Well, so I think I might have found an opportunity in my budget to buy a 501st Legion, full Star Wars outfit, so I'm super excited about it.
Shut up. Seriously?
Yeah, I think I might pull the trigger on either some of the new First Order Stormtroopers.
The white ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So you get the new neat stuff.
Wow.
Or, so we might do something like that.
You know who's a member of, I'm an honorary member, I guess, of the 501st.
So a guy I work with is one of the officers out of it, so he kind of gives some tips on where to buy the stuff from the right places and everything.
What's his first name?
Can't tell you.
Tom?
Jay.
No. Oh, okay. I was going to say, I know a Tom.
Yeah. So
Wouldn't
it's
that be
fun.
cool
So
if it
I
was
think
the same
that's what
one?
I'm going to do. I think haven't quite got that one past the approval process yet,
Got
but
it.
I want one.
I just had a thought about the fact that 2017, and, those of you that don't know, my day job, quote-unquote day job, is a radio host for a rock radio station in Des Moines, Iowa. Been working there for almost 20 years. And in that time, I don't think I've seen a year like this with so many shows and so many high-profile rock concerts. I mean, if you would have told me, even last year, if you would have said, you'll get a Metallica show, a Foo Fighters show, a Green Day show, a Red Hot Chili Peppers show, I'd have been like, where are we? New York City, L.A., Chicago, not Des Moines, Iowa. But you know what? All those things either happened or are upcoming here in Des Moines, Iowa. And as a guy who loves live music, loves going to concerts, I know you do too, Brian, it's pretty mind-blowing to see what we've been able to accomplish here in Des Moines.
Well, I think it's pretty simple. Our town built the environment and built a support structure.
Would you say that? We built this city.
Yes. Yeah, but
we
didn't
built this city
No.
on rock and roll.
No, that's terrible.
Starship. Come on, dude.
I think it has a couple combinations, things to do. Is our city, brings it here, but bands are realizing you don't make money off of album sales anymore.
Oh, that's true.
You make money off of being a road dog, and that's how you make money. And I also think you're seeing the older bands who are now broke going, oh,
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
I need money.
Reunion.
Let's go on tour now. That sounds great. Let's create an album just to get one out there.
Or not. It could just be a money grab. Get
Yeah.
out there and play and make money.
And that's really what I think it's about, is they're realizing, because there's that shift in the 80s, it was all about the tour. 90s was all about album sales. And now it's like, oh crap, we got a tour. But then you got bands who've been road dogging it forever.
Yep.
And
Metallica, great example.
yeah.
Still making music, too.
So that's why I love it, though.
Some of you that have subscribed to us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, may have noticed something pop up in the month of June. Brian and I, of course, did our post-draft special in May, but then in June, I posted something for our subscribers. If you're not a fan of rock or heavy metal music, you probably listened for about 2 seconds and went, this ain't going to be for me. It was a special I put together for Metallica. It's about the band and their 10 albums, and we go in-depth with all 4 members. These are all questions I ask the band and specific band members. It's an hour and a half long. Quite a lengthy listen, but I think it's one of the most comprehensive, up-to-date looks back and forward at Metallica's complete discography.
Yeah.
So.
And even some different answers than what they had given in previous interviews from 10 and 15 years ago.
That's the key right there. It was all fresh responses, so they've had more time to reflect on some of that stuff. But the idea was to put them back into 1983 when we were talking about Kill 'Em All, back to 1984 when we were talking about Ride the Lightning, back to 86 Master of Puppets, so on and so forth. And I think they did a pretty good job of that, putting themselves in those spots. Robert Trujillo was about the only one, the bass player, that, of course, I had to ask him different questions, like, where were you when you first heard Kill 'Em All? And, like, where were you when you first heard Anesthesia Pulling Teeth? And what did you think of it? And Cliff Burton and this and that. But the other three guys, man, they've been there since 83 or earlier. So if you saw that show up and you didn't check it out, it's a good listen. I worked very hard on it. Appreciate you checking that out. If you already did, you liked it, let me know you listened. Let me know you checked it out.
I was there for emotional support.
Brian has been there along the way since day one. Brian was my date to the show at the U.S. Bank Stadium in Minneapolis last August. Brian and I didn't get a chance to connect at the June show at the Iowa Speedway, really, but Brian was up on the rail, so I wasn't about to get up there. Brian's hardcore.
Reflective of that, you're not 20 anymore, pal.
No. You're totally hardcore, man. I would have broken some bones, most definitely. Listen, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of 515 Fantasy Football. Back at it next week with plenty more to talk about, I'm sure. Thanks again to Scott Fish from Fanball and Scott Fishbowl for joining us, too. For Brian Eikenberry, I'm Andy Hall. This is 515 Fantasy Football.